Now, please welcome to the stage Raphael Townshend, Alex Rives, Ashley Zehnder for the panel Encoding Life, Biology Applications of AI, moderated by Madeline Renbarger.
Welcome, everyone. All right. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Really excited to dive into this. So we've had, a lot of discussions today around whether or not LLMs are hitting a data wall right now, and I feel like our panelists here on the bio side of things may have a different opinion about that. I didn't know if you wanted to jump right into that, Ashley.
Yeah, sure. So Ashley Zehnder, I'm the CEO and one of the 3 co-founders of a company called Fauna Bio. So we look at extreme animal genomics, so how other species use the same genes you and I have, but in ways that can allow them to either resist or reverse disease. And I would say from our perspective, right, we're definitely not hitting a wall on bio and bio data sets. I think some of my panelists may have different views on that. We'll talk about that. But I think where humans need to stay in the loop is really figuring out what are the next kind of biological data sets we need to generate to really get the right kind of insights out to ultimately improve human health.
Yeah, I'm Raphael Townshend, founder and CEO at Atomic AI. Atomic High Level is at the intersection of AI, but also RNA drug discovery. You heard of the mRNA vaccines, those kinds of breakthroughs in the last decade. We're right at the intersection there. How I think about data is, I don't think we're hitting any sort of wall there, frankly. Just the scale of data you can generate through techniques like DNA sequencing, whose costs have fallen off a cliff over the last couple decades. It's just insane what you can really do in this space. Happy to talk about that a little bit more, but
yeah, I'm Alex Rives. I'm chief scientist at a company called EvolutionaryScale, and we develop frontier models for biology. We've developed generative models that make the design of proteins programmable. So I think it's important to be concrete, I think, in answering this question. So it depends on where you look. So, there are areas in biology where we have, massive data sets which rival, the size of data that's being used to train LLMs in other fields. In other areas, we have extremely sparse data, things where we're looking at measurements of individual protein functions. So, it's an exciting time for foundation models and language models because, there is this immense resource of sequence data that's available for training models. But the question is then, how do you leverage those models for many of the problems that biologists want to solve where we have very little data?
I was going to say, are there AI applications or systems that you could use to help harness even better data? It sounds like synthetic data is definitely not taboo for you. So.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's a number of things. I mean, first of all, one of the things that we see that parallels, language models in all the other domains is that as you scale the models up, they develop these representation spaces that generalize and transfer. And so you can leverage very small amounts of data to kind of elicit, the response that you want in the model. So this very much parallels AI more broadly. In biology, we can generate data scale, as Raphael said, so maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, in a lot of ways, how biologists typically think about a problem is they'll collect a couple data sets on very specific hypotheses that they're trying to answer. But it turns out that if you know what you're doing and you sort of understand how AI works, you can really retake these same assays and scale them up dramatically in ways that biologists, at first when they hear about this, are like, why would you ever do that? And then you show them what capabilities you can get once you've done this, and there's sort of like a light bulb goes off. So there's certain experiments that we've run where we collect one data point first, then we go to 10, then 100, then 1,000, then 10,000, then 100,000, then 1 million, then 10 million, then 100 million. And it's really, you start seeing these sort of emergent behaviors coming out of these models once you hit some of those really large scales.
Yeah, and I would say where we're seeing improvements in some of these models is not necessarily in the size of any one particular data set or the complexity of any one particular data set, how you intersect the right kinds of data, right? So I think what we're leveraging are sort of known successful biologies, right? So people have probably heard of GLP-1 drugs, right? They're sort of a hot thing right now. The first GLP-1 drugs were found in Gila monsters, right? So we know that we can leverage extreme animal biology to find really successful drugs, but that was done somewhat serendipitously in the past, right? So now we know that we can actually leverage pretty small data sets. So we like to brag about the the rightness and the smallness of some of our data. So for example, if you're looking at human genomics to find novel target discovery, you might need tens of thousands of human samples. Our lead therapeutics program came out of a study using 60 ground squirrel samples. We look a lot with hibernating mammals and how they repair damage to their hearts. But then we intersect those data with now 35 other large data sets, including the entire UK Biobank and many other data sets as well, to figure out how to move those drugs forward. So the right data intersected in the right way, you don't have to have petabytes or larger data sets to answer the right biological questions, but it depends on what you're trying to solve for.
Yeah. Kind of on the point of data, where are you finding the biggest sources? Like you said, small can work in this case, right? So what is the next step, I guess, in your case, since you're focusing directly on drug discovery? When you're identifying candidates, how much is that, knocking off, the long process that it could take to get a drug to market? Where are we kind of in this moment when are the, fully AI synthetically generated drugs going to hit the market?
Yeah, I think that is an experiment that's being run right now. I think there's not a really clear answer to that question. I think it really depends on where people are deploying AI. I think once you have the right biological target, the improvements that companies like the ones that are sharing the stage with me in terms of designing drugs against those targets, protein and RNA models and small molecule models are extremely helpful in terms of optimizing those therapeutics really rapidly. We were just talking backstage about there's not a good model to predict whether those drugs will work in the clinic, right? And so I think where AI is going to need to be more advanced than where it is now is being able to take that rational leap into making predictions about the meaning of all of these data and what it ultimately means biologically. And that's where you still need the human in the loop, which I think is something we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe to say kind of like, two concrete areas where I think, we're at the very beginning stages of a lot of impact. The first is the programmable design of molecules. Mm-hmm. And, if you think about every drug, right, it's a molecule, it has to be designed to have, specific biological activities. And, we're the field as a whole is generating systems that really kind of put this under the control of a drug designer, where now you can really think about, how can you impart specific properties on a molecule? How can you control its structure at an atomic level to have a certain function? And so I think a lot of that's being unlocked right now. And it takes a few years typically to kind of get a drug through the full design process. So, you can really imagine being able to do that digitally at scale, kind of generate millions of candidates simultaneously and test all of them in silico and have something that's pre-qualified. Mm-hmm. The second area is virtual cells. And, here are the ideas basically, to simulate individual cells and kind of learn the underlying circuitry of cells. And, if you can solve that problem, that really gets to some of the questions, some of the most fundamental questions in this field, which is like, is a drug going to succeed or not? And you can really even consider, creating digital twins of, individual patients that have been kind of fine-tuned from, the specific biology of their cells. And so I think we're very close to models like that. We have, in some sense, some very, Gen zero versions of models like that today. So I think that will move very fast.
Yeah, and just to build on what Alex was saying, I think something that I'm really excited about for AI and bio specifically is unlocking this capability known as rational design at the end of the day, which is really like traditional drug discovery is operated. You throw things at a wall, you see what sticks. If that works, great. If it doesn't, then you don't know where to go from there. If you can understand from first principles what's going wrong in your body, then you can intelligently design molecules to fix those issues. And AI is actually representing a very promising path forward for this whole thing. Feedback's a little distracting. So yeah, AI really represents a very promising path forward for these rational design kind of approaches where we really can use it to understand from first principles what's going wrong and design cures to solve those issues.
Yeah, I guess also, Raphael, I know you've working in the RNA space. The mRNA vaccines that we're all, I think, familiar with in the audience were crucial, in Operation Warp Speed development to, really accelerate, coming out from the pandemic. And one thing that I found fascinating is, where do you think we are in terms of using that unlock to kind of create either custom vaccines or a universal vaccine for all drugs?
I mean, there's a huge amount of excitement around these sort of universal vaccines overall. It's like designing things that can protect you against multiple diseases at once. And computation and AI specifically are starting to play a very major role in the design of those. I mean, you mentioned the mRNA vaccines, right? Those were computationally designed within a couple weeks from the start of of us identifying what the pathogens were in the first place. So it was sort of like this impressive demonstration of what, we can do computationally in a way that it really sort of paints the picture of where you can go in the future. And I think it's really just getting started at the end of the day. And I'm actually very keen on seeing where AI is going to take us in the next couple decades.
I think at the end of the day, I mean, it's a tropism, but like biology is complicated, right? And life tends to find a way to steal from Jurassic Park, right? I think so. It depends a little bit on how fast things are changing, how fast things are mutating. Can you keep up? And I think AI certainly helps with that, right? Like if you can iterate faster than the viruses can, then you have a much better chance to keep up with this.
Good point, yeah. One thing also that's been, big hot topic of discussion today is, AI agents and agentic work. How are you seeing AI agents being helpful in the work that you're doing at your companies? How are you integrating agentic workflows, or if they're not working, which one would work in the future if you could have a hypothetical great agent?
I mean, we do a lot of sort of reinforcement learning type work at Atomic where we're really guiding the next sets of experiments based on what data we think is maximally useful to increase the confidence of these kinds of models in a specific way. There's still very much a human in the loop, though, to be clear. What's happening is you're looking at where your AI is not confident and then specifically collecting data sets to reinforce those pieces of it. And this is definitely still very much on the cutting edge of where the research is going. And I think there's still a lot of open question in this space, but I'm personally quite excited about that overall direction.
I mean, I think, the question is where the bottleneck is, right? I think that's a really critical question when you think about automation. And so in biology, I think a lot of the bottleneck is the laboratory. Essentially you have to go ask a question of nature and see the answer right. You get the answer back from nature. And this is an incredibly painstaking and difficult thing to do. And so entire companies and fields in biology are kind of built around creating technologies to ask certain questions. So in my mind, I think a lot of the value of automation is going to come from being able to kind of learn biology from nature. And biology is an information science. And so we have, I think for the very first time, the tools that can actually model this system, model nature in its native language. And so from that, then you can think about really replacing kind of the need to ask a question of nature with asking that question in simulation and checking the answer in nature. And so I think that's where a lot of, the value of automation will come in. And then of course you can imagine accelerating that as you have systems that can kind of ask these questions in an automated way.
So you're seeing the scale, really, to quote your company name, is really one factor that this can really accelerate here. The scale of where you can find these things and where you can develop new biology and new discoveries much quicker, on a different range of things that still can be tested in the lab with the human in the loop, but bring through. Yeah.
Because the scale comes from asking the question that you would ask in experiments digitally. And you can spin up 1 million simulations and look at all the outcomes and really understand what may be possible in a much kind of broader way. So I think that's where over the near term there's going to be a lot of potential for these types of AI approaches in this area.
So we've got a kind of very specific use case where we've really looked at how agents can improve, especially our drug discovery process. So right now, in addition to building our own therapeutic pipeline, we do target discovery work for Eli Lilly for obesity. So we've got nearly $500 million partnership with them to find new drug targets, which if you can imagine, how many people in the world are looking for new obesity targets right now, it's kind of a hard job. But we've been doing cycles of target discovery using our data, integrated with all the other data sets with human beings who are excellent drug hunters, and then comparing that really directly to the AI agents that we have trained to use our own Fauna platforms. It's called Fauna Brain, uses all the parts of Fauna platform. And so, our drug hunters typically go through kind of 1.5 week cycles to come up with a list of targets that they feel comfortable enough to present to our partners at Eli Lilly. Our platform with the agents that have been trained to use the platform in ways that are informed by how the drug hunters do it can do it about 7 minutes. And so, there's 500x, improvement in speed. And so that, meaningfully improves our ability to present high quality targets based on our unique data sets to a large pharma partner that pays us for those insights, right? So it has a meaningful impact on our bottom line to be able to do those insights faster and more scalably. But human in the loop, right? Those agents are being trained to use the platform in ways that are informed by how the humans do it. And like you mentioned, I really like the fact that you mentioned where the agents are unsure, they're asking questions, right? If something is very unclear from a cycle in the process, raise that up to a human reviewer, learn from the input from that human, and do it better the next time, right? But you really have to have that back and forth.
I'm going to ask a kind of, I guess, silly science fiction-y question since I have, these great scientists on stage with me. But where kind of are we, you think about drug discovery and AI applications really speeding up these processes and making customizable solo drugs. Do people ever approach you with concerns around, gene editing or a Gattaca future, where everything's programmable and AI can generate, amazing traits and maybe dangerous things? I mean, there's a debate about how really realistic that is. But what do you think about it? I'm curious.
That's an interesting question, and I think genotype is one thing, phenotype is a whole other thing, right? Like genomics and genotyping is actually quite straightforward. Understanding the phenotypes or the results of those genetics is actually a much more complicated question. That data is much harder to come by, and that's a lot of the data that we capture is this phenotypic data. So what happens when you have a specific genetic trait or a gene that's expressed in a certain way, and that's influenced by not only environment, but other genes and expression and diet. There's just a bunch of other layers that go into that, and so I think we're quite far away from that. But I'm curious to hear what you guys.
One trend that you might have heard through all of us here is we're still saying there's a lab involved, right? So even if you've got the AI that can do something amazing here, actually, in a lot of ways, you still need the investment in the capital equipment to build that lab to actually perform a lot of these experiments. So I hear something very similar, for example, like, if you have something that's great at predicting RNA viruses, couldn't you use it to design a better virus? It's like, I hate to break it to you folks, but that's not the hard part of designing a better virus or something. So, it's really, in some ways, I think there's a lot of other barriers to those kinds of things. I think that AI definitely really is an enabler in many ways, but we're not at a stage where we've removed the lab from the loop or the human from the loop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't really think about questions like this without really thinking about the risks and the benefits together, the potential risks and what are the benefits. And, all knowledge has this character, all scientific knowledge has this character in that it produces technology which creates new powers in the world. And so, a model which can understand viruses could perhaps be used to design viruses. It's hard to take these two things apart. But a model which can understand viruses can then also be used to build vaccines, to build systems that could respond instantly to a pandemic, could create something like a universal vaccine. And so, I think it's really, the question is how do we choose to use these technologies? And, I think, I really see that as a societal question. If we build these tools, there's the potential to make the world so much, more secure with them if we apply them in the right way.
Yeah. I did want to ask each of you, that's a great segue, where do you see with these tools, kind of, time to predict the future, but where do you see, candidates development and speed around creating either universal vaccines or things like this? What developments can you predict in the next, 5 years or even 10 years out? I mean, put on your, glasses into the future, but.
So I think the experiment essentially in seeing how well drugs that are designed with some component of AI in some part of the cycle are performing in clinical trials. Actually, I was going back and through kind of running the numbers before this panel, and actually there were 4 companies that put drugs into the clinic in 2022 that had some component of AI, either in target discovery or synthetic development. Recursion is one of those, Verge Genomics, BioAge, and now I'm going to blank on the 4th one. But those clinical trial processes do take a long time, and I think by the time you have 5 or 10 years out, there's going to be another wave of companies, ourselves included, putting drugs in the clinic that we'll see how they perform, and we'll be able to better evaluate where was AI involved in the development of those drugs? Where did it make a meaningful improvement? We just need better N numbers, but I think by 5 or 10 years from now, we'll have actually most drugs that enter the clinic will probably have some component of AI, either in the chemical discovery or the biological discovery or the clinical trial optimization, which we were talking about. And we'll start to be able to actually ask the question of the data, is where was that AI most impactful? I think that's going to be really, really cool to look at.
Yeah, I mean, to really build on that, the first AI designed drugs, right, depending on how you define it, I mean, definitely over the next decade, we're going to start seeing those. And just to really highlight it, just in the last few years, there's been some amazing breakthroughs in bio, specifically for AI. Like experiments that would take like months or years previous to do, we can now do in seconds in some cases here. And it takes time for those changes to propagate through the system, especially something as heavily regulated as drug development. Like you're still running clinical trials. So it takes time, but make no mistake, it is coming at the end of the day, and it is going to happen.
So I guess if you think about the systems that we engineer, biology is perhaps, the most advanced and incredible technology that has ever been created. And it wasn't created by humans, it was created by evolution. But, there's a programmable molecular factory, at the center of every cell that receives instructions as a sequence and can 3D print, at the molecular scale, dynamic molecular machines, and the entire information architecture of the cell is something which rivals or exceeds in complexity, the most advanced engineered systems that we can create. And so, if you really think about that for a moment, and you think about how we design things at the macro scale in the world, or at the micro scale, like a microchip, we have the principles of rational design, and we can simulate, and we can build our systems from first principle. And that has been the thing that has been missing from biology. We have been limited to hacking, nature. And so what would it mean to be able to, really design nature from first principles, to program biology? And, those are the types of tools that I think, the very rudimentary versions of those exist today, and it will just become more and more programmable and rational, as we're able to scale these systems up and kind of condense more and more of kind of the information architecture of biology into generalist models.
That's a great place to end. Alex, Raphael, Ashley, thank you so much.